Cleopatra was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, a city where the air itself seemed filled with learning, trade, and ambition. She entered a world glittering with wealth, yet shadowed by danger. She was born into the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, a royal family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, since the time of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies lived in splendor, but their court was also full of jealousy, rivalry, and fear. From the very beginning, Cleopatra's life stood at the meeting point of two worlds: the ancient majesty of Egypt and the restless power of the Mediterranean empires gathering around it. Unlike many rulers who inherited crowns without preparing their minds, Cleopatra grew into power through study. She was educated in languages, science, mathematics, philosophy, and music. In the palace of Alexandria, she learned not only how kingdoms were governed, but how ideas shaped loyalty and ambition. She became known for her sharp intelligence and love of knowledge. Most members of her family clung to their Greek identity and did not bother to learn the language of the Egyptian people they ruled. Cleopatra was different. She learned Egyptian, and that single decision revealed much about her character. She understood that power was not merely worn in a crown or proclaimed in a title. It was built through connection, through understanding, through the ability to speak to people in words that belonged to them. Even in her youth, Egypt's situation was troubled. The land was rich, famous for its grain, its ports, and its strategic importance, but the kingdom was no longer secure. Rome was expanding, drawing weaker states into its influence one by one. Egyptian wealth attracted Roman attention, while Egyptian weakness invited Roman interference. Cleopatra inherited not a peaceful kingdom, but a nation balancing on the edge of dependency. Her challenge was immense: preserve Egypt's independence in a world where Rome increasingly decided the fate of nations. When Cleopatra's father died in 51 BC, that burden came to her almost at once. She was only 18 years old when she became queen. Yet even the throne was not fully hers. According to the customs of her dynasty, she was required to rule alongside her much younger brother, Ptolemy XFT. The arrangement was meant to preserve royal tradition, but it created division. Cleopatra had intelligence, confidence, and a clear will to rule, while her brother was still a child, easily guided by advisors who wanted power for themselves. Those men feared Cleopatra's independence and resented the authority she naturally commanded. They worked in whispers and in public maneuvering, turning opinion against her, attacking her influence, and slowly isolating her from the center of power. The conflict soon sharpened into open struggle. Cleopatra was not content to be a symbol, while others ruled in her name, and her enemies could not tolerate a young queen who refused to submit. Her brother's advisors stirred resistance against her, presenting her as a threat rather than a rightful ruler. In the end, their campaign succeeded for a time. Cleopatra was driven from Alexandria and forced into exile in Syria. For Cleopatra, exile became a place of planning. She did not see herself as overthrown forever. She saw herself as challenged, and challenge awakened her determination. In Syria, Cleopatra gathered supporters and began building an army. She understood that reclaiming the throne would require more than hope. It would require strategy, persuasion, and courage. She worked to gather loyal allies and prepared to fight for her position. She was young, dispossessed, and surrounded by danger. Yet she refused to surrender her claim or her future. Even before her most famous encounters, Cleopatra showed the qualities that would define her life: intelligence joined with action and imagination joined with resolve. She knew that survival depended on seizing opportunity when it appeared, and soon such an opportunity arrived in the form of the most powerful Roman of his age. Julius Caesar came to Egypt while pursuing his rival Pompey during Rome's civil war. Pompey, seeking refuge, fled to Egypt. But the Egyptian advisors around Ptolemy Exile made a disastrous calculation. Hoping to please Caesar, they had Pompey killed before Caesar could arrive. Instead of gratitude, Caesar was outraged. He had not come to admire treachery. His arrival changed the balance of power in Egypt overnight. Cleopatra understood that this Roman intervention might provide the opening she needed. Yet Caesar was surrounded by the politics of Egypt, and approaching him directly would have been nearly impossible for a queen in exile. So Cleopatra chose daring over caution. She secretly entered Caesar's palace, concealed inside a rolled carpet, or perhaps a bundle of bedding, as some accounts suggest, allowing herself to be delivered into his presence without the guards stopping her. Cleopatra was willing to gamble everything on a single bold act. When she appeared before Caesar, she came as a queen presenting herself with wit, confidence, and intelligence. Caesar was impressed. Her courage, her mind, and her political instinct were impossible to ignore. In that meeting, Cleopatra achieved what armies alone could not. She made herself unforgettable. Cleopatra convinced Caesar to support her claim to the throne. He sided with her against Ptolemy Exile and the forces around him, drawing Rome directly into the conflict. This did not end the danger. In many ways, it deepened it. Soon Cleopatra and Caesar found themselves trapped in Alexandria during a violent struggle now known as the Alexandrian War. The city became a battleground. Their enemies pressed hard, and the outcome for a time was uncertain. Cleopatra had won Caesar's support, but support meant little if they were both destroyed before victory could be secured. At last Roman reinforcements arrived. The Egyptian army was defeated, and Ptolemy Exile, trying to escape, drowned. The struggle that had driven Cleopatra into exile ended with her restoration. Cleopatra regained her throne, no longer as a displaced ruler pleading for recognition, but as a queen who had fought, calculated, and won. She remained formally tied to dynastic arrangements, but her position was stronger than before. Her bond with Caesar also deepened. History has remembered them as political allies and likely lovers, and their connection had enormous public importance. Cleopatra saw in Caesar a means by which Egypt might survive in an age of Roman domination. Caesar saw in Cleopatra a ruler, unlike the others around her, someone capable of thought, charisma, and rule. Their alliance reshaped Egypt's future. In time, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion, whom she claimed was Caesar's child. For Cleopatra, the child represented more than motherhood. He was dynastic hope, political symbolism, and perhaps a dream of legitimacy linking Egypt to Rome's most celebrated leader. Not long afterward, Cleopatra traveled to Rome and stayed in Caesar's villa. Her presence there stirred discomfort and resentment among many Romans. She was foreign, powerful, and impossible to reduce to a decorative guest. To Caesar's enemies, she seemed a sign of dangerous ambition. Cleopatra had once returned from exile to reclaim a kingdom. Now she stood in the heart of the republic that threatened every kingdom around it. Then history turned with brutal speed. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated by Roman senators who feared his growing power. For Cleopatra, the consequences were immediate and severe. The protector on whom she had relied was gone. Rome was unstable, and Egypt could not afford to be caught helpless in the chaos. Cleopatra returned quickly to Egypt with her son. She had survived one political storm only to face another even greater one. Caesar's death did not weaken Rome. Instead, it unleashed another struggle for control of the Roman world. And once again Cleopatra had to judge which alliance might preserve her throne and her country. From the Roman conflict emerged new contenders, and among the most powerful was Mark Antony. a soldier of reputation and forceful personality. Antony became one of the dominant leaders in the divided Roman state. When he summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, the encounter was heavy with danger. She could not appear weak, yet open defiance was impossible. Cleopatra responded as only she could. She arrived magnificently, turning the meeting into theater and diplomacy at once. Ancient writers describe splendor, perfume, and luxury, and the effect is clear. Cleopatra intended not merely to answer Antony's call, but to shape the terms of the encounter. She captivated him. What followed was both a romance and a political partnership. Cleopatra and Antony formed an alliance that bound emotion, ambition, and strategy together. They became lovers, and together they had 3 children. Yet theirs was never only a private love story. Antony needed resources, wealth, and Eastern support. Cleopatra needed a powerful Roman ally who could defend Egypt's interests against rivals. For a time, the partnership seemed formidable, but power in Rome was never secure when challenged by propaganda, fear, and rivalry. Antony's enemy Octavian understood this well, and he used it with ruthless skill. Octavian portrayed Antony not as a Roman leader making strategic choices, but as a man corrupted and controlled by Cleopatra. Roman politics turned their relationship into a weapon. Cleopatra was cast as a dangerous foreign queen, seducing Antony away from Roman duty. This image, repeated and sharpened, stirred Roman opinion against them. Antony's decisions became easier to condemn when attached to Cleopatra's name. In this way, she became a symbol in Rome's struggle over identity, loyalty, and empire. The campaign against them was fought not only with armies but with stories. The conflict finally erupted into open battle. In 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's forces in the great naval Battle of Actium. It was the turning point on which their future rested. Victory might have preserved their power. Defeat would expose everything. The battle ended in disaster. Their forces were beaten, and Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. From that moment the end drew near. The defeat at Actium was not merely military. It shattered confidence, weakened alliances, and gave Octavian the momentum to finish what he had begun. Egypt, which Cleopatra had struggled all her life to protect from outside control, now stood almost defenseless before Rome's advance. Octavian invaded Egypt, and Antony faced failure again. The world around Cleopatra, once full of possibilities, began closing in. Then came the tragedy that turned defeat into personal ruin. Antony heard the false rumor that Cleopatra was dead. Overcome by despair, believing the woman with whom he had built his last hopes was gone, he chose suicide. Mortally wounded, he was brought to Cleopatra, and he died in her arms. It was the collapse not only of their alliance, but of the future they had imagined together. Antony ended his life broken by loss and defeat. Cleopatra now faced Octavian alone. Captured and stripped of any real chance to regain power, she understood what awaited her if she submitted completely. She would be taken to Rome, displayed as a defeated queen in a Roman triumph, transformed from ruler into spectacle. For a woman who had fought all her life to preserve dignity, sovereignty, and agency, such humiliation was intolerable. In 30 BC, refusing to live as a prisoner of Octavian, Cleopatra chose death. The legends surrounding her final moments are many, but whatever the exact method, the meaning of her choice has echoed across history. Even in defeat, she determined the last act of her own story. With Cleopatra's death, ancient Egypt's independence came to an end. The kingdom that had once stood as one of the great powers of the ancient world became part of the Roman Empire. The line of pharaohs, in any meaningful independent sense, ended with her. Octavian emerged victorious, but Cleopatra's fall marked the passing of an era. Egypt ceased to be a sovereign kingdom directing its own destiny, and became instead a possession of a far larger imperial system. Cleopatra had fought against that outcome with every tool available to her: intellect, diplomacy, language, spectacle, alliance, courage, and will. That is why her legacy has endured for more than 2,000 years. Cleopatra is remembered not only because she was beautiful or dramatic, as legend has too often simplified her, but because she was brilliant, brave, and fiercely determined. She learned when others ignored. She adapted when others clung to habit. She understood the power of knowledge as deeply as the power of armies. She ruled in a time when stronger forces closed in from every side, and still she resisted being reduced to a puppet or a footnote. Her life was full of calculation and boldness. She could read a political crisis, risk everything on a single meeting, and still hold to her own purpose. Cleopatra's story remains powerful because it is larger than romance and more complex than defeat. It is the story of a woman who understood that history does not belong only to those born into safe times. It also belongs to those who meet danger with intelligence, courage, and perseverance. Again and again, Cleopatra faced exile, conspiracy, war, betrayal, and overwhelming odds. Again and again, she answered with action. Even when she could not control the forces around her, she refused to surrender the ability to choose. In that sense, the deepest truth of her story is not only that kingdoms rise and fall, but that knowledge, courage, and perseverance can shape history even in the hardest of times. That is why Cleopatra, last queen of an ancient kingdom, still lives in memory as one of the most remarkable women the world has ever known.